The final moments of Anne Boleyn were even more terrifying than you were told. Anne Boleyn was not born into royalty, yet from an early age, she showed signs of intelligence, ambition, and charm that would one day bring her to the highest position in England. She was likely born around 1501, the daughter of Sir Thomas Boleyn, a skilled diplomat, and Lady Elizabeth Howard, a woman of noble heritage. Her family was respected, but not wealthy enough to claim the great influence that kings and queens commanded. From childhood, Anne was carefully educated, far more so than most girls of her time. She learned French, music, dancing, and the courtly manners that would later allow her to move with confidence among nobles and diplomats. These lessons were not merely for show. They shaped a young girl who understood the importance of intelligence and strategy in a world dominated by men. Anne's early years were spent partially in the courtly circles of the English nobility, but much of her youth was abroad. She was sent to the Netherlands and later to France as part of the household of Queen Claude. In these foreign courts, Anne observed power, diplomacy, and the behavior of women who wielded influence. The French court was elaborate, sophisticated, and sometimes cruel, but Anne thrived in its challenges. She learned to balance charm with wit, to make herself admired without appearing threatening, and to navigate rivalries with careful precision. This experience abroad polished her into a young woman of poise and elegance, someone who could captivate even the most powerful men with her presence. When Anne returned to England, she was no longer simply a young girl of a minor noble family. She was a polished lady, educated, elegant, and confident. She quickly became part of King Henry VII's court, a place that was as dangerous as it was glamorous. The court was filled with ambition, jealousy, and shifting alliances, and Anne understood that survival here required more than beauty. It required intelligence, observation, and strategy. Henry, captivated by her charm and fiery spirit, took notice, and the young courtier who once moved quietly among nobles now found herself at the center of attention. Anne Boleyn's relationship with Henry VII began with fascination and admiration. Henry, a king known for his strength, intelligence, and sometimes impulsive nature, found in Anne a woman unlike any he had encountered. She was clever, outspoken, and unafraid to challenge him in conversation. Unlike some of Henry's other companions, Anne refused to become simply a passive object of his desire. She demanded respect, and in doing so, she ignited a passion in the king that would change the course of England forever. Their courtship was not quiet or private. It became a central matter of the kingdom, as Henry's pursuit of Anne led him to make decisions that would have long-lasting political and religious consequences. The most notable consequence of Henry's love for Anne was his break from the Catholic Church. For years, Henry had been married to Catherine of Aragon, a union that had produced a daughter but no surviving male heir. Henry's desire for a son to secure the Tudor dynasty was urgent and obsessive. His fascination with Anne Boleyn gave him a reason to challenge the authority of the Pope, ultimately leading to the English Reformation. Anne, aware of her position, maintained a careful balance. She encouraged Henry's desire for marriage, but she also understood that her influence came with risk. If she failed to bear him a son, or if the king's passion faded, her position could become dangerously unstable. In 1533, Anne gave birth to her only surviving child, Elizabeth. Though Henry had hoped for a son, the birth of Elizabeth was celebrated and would later have profound historical significance. For a time, Anne's position was secure, and she enjoyed the privileges and status of being queen. She was admired by some for her intelligence and grace, but her outspokenness and determination made her enemies. Members of the court, jealous or wary of her influence over the king, began to whisper, plotting to undermine her. At court, power was never absolute, and the higher one rose, the sharper the threats became. Anne's rise had been dazzling, but it also made her a target. Despite the dangers, Anne carried herself with remarkable confidence. She understood that her role as queen was not just ceremonial, it carried real influence. She participated in political matters, advised the king, and championed causes she believed in. Anne's ambition and intellect made her more than a figurehead, but these very qualities, admired by some, were feared by others. In a court where flattery often disguised scheming, Anne's refusal to be submissive was a bold, dangerous choice. Every word she spoke and every action she took was scrutinized, and she had to navigate this treacherous environment with caution. As time passed, cracks began to appear in the foundation of Anne's life. Henry's attention, once so fiercely focused on her, began to waver. Courtly rivals took advantage of the king's occasional distraction, spreading rumors and feeding suspicions. Anne, who had once seemed untouchable, began to feel the pressures of a position that demanded perfection in every way: beauty, intelligence, charm, and the production of a male heir. The failure to provide a son intensified scrutiny and bred resentment among courtiers eager to regain favor with the king. Every glance, every whispered comment became a threat, and Anne's brilliant rise now contained the seeds of potential disaster. Anne Boleyn's story is a tale of ambition, intelligence, and human complexity. She was a woman who understood her worth and wielded her influence with skill, yet she lived in a time when women, even queens, were vulnerable to the whims of powerful men. Her rise to power was extraordinary, but the same qualities that elevated her, her charm, intellect, and courage, also made her enemies. By the spring of 1536, the atmosphere at court had shifted. Allies became strangers, whispers became accusations, and the security Anne had once enjoyed began to dissolve. The dazzling rise of Anne Boleyn, which had seemed unstoppable, now faced the harsh reality of betrayal, fear, and the precariousness of power. Looking back, it is clear that Anne Boleyn's life was a mixture of triumph and danger. She was celebrated for her beauty, admired for her intelligence, and remembered for her wit, yet she was also a figure who faced envy, suspicion, and ultimately tragedy. The queen who had once commanded the heart of Henry VIII now stood at the edge of a perilous fall. Her story reminds us that power, especially in the royal courts of the past, was as fragile as it was dazzling, and even those who seemed untouchable could be swept away by forces beyond their control. Anne's early life and rise to power teach an important lesson about courage and resilience. She navigated a world dominated by men, mastered diplomacy, and asserted her presence in ways that few women of her time could. Her intelligence and determination left a lasting mark on history, showing that even in danger, a person could assert themselves with dignity and strength. Yet her story also foreshadows the terror and heartbreak that would come when the tides of fortune turned, when allies became enemies, and when the court that once celebrated her beauty and wit turned cold and dangerous. By the time the spring of 1536 arrived, Anne Boleyn's life was on the brink of a dramatic shift. From a bright, ambitious girl educated in courts abroad to the powerful Queen of England, she had navigated obstacles, captivated a king, and influenced history. But the same qualities that had elevated her, intelligence, courage, and determination, now drew the attention of those who would seek her downfall. Anne's rise was extraordinary, but history would soon reveal that even queens were not safe from fear, betrayal, and the perilous games of power. The story of her final days was about to begin, and it would be far more terrifying than many imagined. Anne Boleyn's life, once full of power, privilege, and influence, took a sudden and terrifying turn in the spring of 1536. On the morning of May 2nd, she was quietly arrested at her residence. The charge was treason, a word that in Tudor England carried the gravest consequences. Along with accusations of adultery and incest, The claim seemed designed to shock and shame not just Anne, but all who supported her. The accusations were largely fabricated by those seeking favor with King Henry VIII, who had grown distant and impatient with his queen. Despite the flimsy evidence, the laws of the time made Anne's situation almost impossible to escape. Even a queen, once at the height of influence, could find herself powerless in the face of royal authority. Anne's arrest was carried out swiftly and efficiently. Soldiers and court officials entered her residence with precision, showing no hesitation. Anne was taken by surprise but attempted to maintain her composure. She was aware that panic or resistance would only worsen her fate. Her attendants, some loyal and some fearful of the king's wrath, were left behind as she was escorted from the familiar comforts of her home into the cold, unyielding walls of the Tower of London. The Tower was both a fortress and a prison, a place where royals and commoners alike could face death under the king's command. For Anne, the Tower was no longer a symbol of power or protection. It had become a place of isolation and dread. The journey to the Tower was long enough for Anne to reflect on the drastic change in her life. Just months before, she had walked the corridors of the palace with confidence, attended formal dinners, and laughed with friends and courtiers. Now she faced a reality in which every step, every glance, and every word could be used against her. Anne knew that her arrest marked the beginning of a series of events that could lead to her death. The guards were polite but firm, their expressions revealing nothing, leaving Anne to imagine the worst. In her mind, she tried to prepare herself for what might come, though the terror of the unknown weighed heavily on her. Once inside the Tower, Anne was subjected to the strict rules of imprisonment. The Tower was a place of strict routines, cold stone rooms, and limited contact with the outside world. Anne's quarters were sparse, lacking the warmth and elegance she had enjoyed as queen. She was allowed only a few attendants, some of whom remained loyal to her, offering comfort and assistance when possible. Yet even with this support, the sense of isolation was suffocating. The Tower's walls, though historic and impressive, now seemed to close in on her, reminding Anne that she was at the mercy of those who had once served her. Each day in captivity deepened her anxiety, as she awaited the next step in the process that would determine her fate. During her time in the Tower, Anne faced repeated interrogations and questioning. Court officials and investigators sought to extract confessions or evidence of wrongdoing, but Anne remained steadfast. She denied all charges firmly, refusing to admit to acts she had not committed. Despite her courage, the experience was terrifying. Those questioning her were skilled in the art of intimidation, using fear, suggestion, and even isolation to weaken her resolve. Anne's strength and composure became a form of quiet rebellion, a testament to her character, but the pressure she faced was immense. In a time when the accused were often convicted regardless of evidence, every moment brought the threat of death closer. Rumors and gossip about Anne's supposed crimes circulated throughout London and the court. Stories of alleged adultery, conspiracy, and immorality spread rapidly, fueling public curiosity and court intrigue. For Anne, these rumors were a double-edged sword. They demonstrated her enemies' willingness to manipulate perception and truth, but they also served as a reminder of how quickly public opinion could be turned against even the most admired person. Friends who had once supported her now hesitated to speak openly, fearing association with someone accused of treason. Anne had to rely on her own courage and intelligence to navigate this dangerous environment. Every day, she observed and calculated, understanding that survival might depend on careful decisions and measured words. Life in the Tower also forced Anne to confront her personal fears and uncertainties. She was separated from her daughter, Elizabeth, who remained under the care of others. The thought of never seeing her child again was a constant source of anguish. Anne had loved Elizabeth deeply, and her maternal instincts added an emotional burden to the already terrifying circumstances. Sleep was often elusive, as the mind cannot rest when danger is so near. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound from the guards, became a source of anxiety. Anne faced not only the physical confinement of the tower, but also the mental strain of imagining every possible outcome, most of them grim. Despite the fear and isolation, Anne drew strength from her sense of dignity and faith. She prayed often, seeking comfort in her belief that she had acted rightly and that her conscience was clear. Anne's education and intelligence allowed her to reflect on her situation with a sense of strategic thinking, even as emotions ran high. She understood that, in Tudor England, appearances mattered as much as truth. How she conducted herself in the tower, how she responded to questioning, and how she maintained her composure could influence the way she was perceived by the king and the court. Even in captivity, she was conscious of the historical significance of her actions and demeanor. Anne's interactions with her attendants were marked by a mix of kindness and determination. She sought to comfort those who remained loyal, offering words of encouragement and maintaining her own sense of calm to prevent fear from spreading. These small acts of leadership reinforced her character, demonstrating that even in the darkest hours, she could inspire and influence others. Her attendants became witnesses to both her vulnerability and her courage, observing a queen brought low by circumstances beyond her control, yet refusing to surrender her dignity or self-respect. As days passed, Anne's understanding of the political landscape deepened. She realized that her enemies were not just individuals within the court, but powerful forces aligned with the king's changing desires. Those who had once been her allies had shifted loyalties, prioritizing their survival and advancement over loyalty to her. The intrigue, manipulation, and treachery of the court became more apparent with each passing hour. Anne, once confident in her position, now faced the harsh reality that influence and favor could vanish in an instant. The precariousness of her life was a lesson in how quickly fortune could change, even for someone as brilliant and capable as herself. In the tower, Anne also reflected on her own decisions and ambitions. She had pursued power, love, and influence with determination, and now she faced the consequences of living in a world where men held ultimate authority. Her ambition, once a source of strength and pride, now carried a sense of danger. The realization that her life could end unjustly weighed heavily, but Anne refused to succumb to despair. She continued to act with grace, intelligence, and courage, knowing that her behavior could leave a lasting impression on history, even if the outcome was beyond her control. Despite the terror of imprisonment, Anne's mind remained sharp. She observed everything around her, the guards, the visitors, the court officials, learning their patterns, their moods, and their intentions. This awareness allowed her to maintain a sense of agency, even in a situation designed to strip her of power. Anne understood that survival depended not only on external circumstances, but also on her ability to remain composed, thoughtful, and aware. Her strategic thinking became both a shield and a lifeline, helping her navigate the challenges of captivity. Anne's time in the tower also highlighted the fragility of human loyalty. Friends, servants, and courtiers who had once seemed steadfast now wavered under the pressures of fear and self-interest. Betrayal, both subtle and overt, became a daily concern. Anne had to discern who could be trusted and who might be motivated by ambition or fear. The realization that even those closest to her could turn against her was a painful lesson in the complexities of human behavior and the dangers of court life. As the days turned into weeks, Anne's awareness of the inevitability of a trial became stronger. She knew that the next steps would determine whether she lived or died. The fear of the unknown, combined with the awareness of the fabricated charges against her, created a constant state of tension. Anne's courage and intelligence were tested as never before. She faced the possibility of public humiliation, betrayal by witnesses, and a legal system designed to favor the king. Yet even in this perilous time, Anne maintained her dignity, preparing herself for the ordeal that lay ahead. In the Tower, Anne Boleyn's life became a delicate balance between hope and fear. She could not control the accusations, the king's desires, or the actions of her enemies. Yet she could control her responses, her behavior, and her dignity. This inner strength allowed her to endure conditions that would have broken many others. She remained composed, thoughtful, and aware, knowing that history would judge her not only by her fate, but by the courage and grace she displayed in facing it. Anne's imprisonment was more than a physical confinement. It was a test of character, resilience, and endurance. Each day brought new challenges, from interrogations and isolation to the constant awareness of danger. Yet she faced them with intelligence, courage, and dignity. Even as rumors spread and her enemies celebrated her downfall, Anne remained resolute. She was aware that her life might soon end, yet she sought to leave a mark of honor and integrity, demonstrating that even in the darkest circumstances, a person could maintain self-respect and courage. By the time the trial approached, Anne had spent weeks in the Tower, reflecting, praying, and preparing herself. She had faced the fear of betrayal, the pain of isolation, and the terror of uncertainty, all while maintaining a sense of dignity and composure. Anne Boleyn's experience in the Tower of London was a testament to the precariousness of power, the cruelty of political ambition, and the strength of the human spirit. She was a queen brought low, yet she faced her circumstances with intelligence, courage, and grace that would echo through history. Anne Boleyn's trial was one of the most significant and terrifying moments of her life. After weeks in the Tower of London, confined to her cold cell and surrounded by the fear of the unknown, she was finally summoned to Westminster to face the charges that could end her life. The accusations against her were shocking and unprecedented for a queen. She was accused of adultery, incest, and conspiring to murder the king. Each charge was designed not only to destroy her personally, but also to make a public example of her. The courtroom, though imposing, became the stage for a drama that would captivate the kingdom and haunt history for centuries to come. Anne entered the trial aware of the stakes. The charges were almost certainly fabricated, yet in Tudor England, once a person was accused of treason, the outcome was often predetermined. She faced a jury composed largely of men who owed their loyalty to the king, not to justice. Witnesses were carefully chosen, and many were coerced into giving testimony against her. Despite this, Anne held her head high, determined to face the court with dignity and intelligence. Every glance, every word, and every gesture mattered. Her awareness of the historical weight of this trial added to the pressure she already felt. The trial began with the reading of charges, each one designed to shock and shame. Adultery was considered not only a personal betrayal, but also a political crime, as it threatened the legitimacy of heirs and the stability of the kingdom. The charge of incest was particularly scandalous, meant to humiliate Anne further and make the king appear justified in his actions. Finally, the accusation of conspiring to murder Henry was the most serious of all, implying that Anne had betrayed the man she had once loved and the monarch she had served. For Anne, listening to these charges must have been both shocking and terrifying, yet she maintained her composure throughout. The witnesses who testified against Anne presented their accounts with dramatic detail. Some claimed to have seen or heard acts that never truly occurred. Others repeated rumors and court gossip as if they were facts. Each accusation was meant to erode Anne's credibility, painting her as a woman who had betrayed her husband, her king, and her country. Anne, however, responded with calmness and intelligence. She denied every allegation, refusing to admit guilt for crimes she had not committed. Her poise in the face of such overwhelming pressure demonstrated her courage and resolve. The courtroom atmosphere was tense and charged with anticipation. Spectators, nobles, and courtiers filled the room, eager to witness history unfold. Some were there out of curiosity, others out of loyalty to the king, and still others out of personal ambition. The eyes of the kingdom were upon Anne Boleyn, a queen accused of the most serious crimes imaginable. Every move she made was observed, every word she spoke analyzed for signs of weakness or guilt. Anne understood that she was not only defending her life, but also her reputation and dignity. Her behavior in the trial would be remembered long after the verdict was delivered. Despite the fear and uncertainty, Anne's mind remained sharp. She recognized the political motivations behind the trial and the power dynamics at play. She knew that her fate was tied not only to the king's desire for a new marriage, but also to the ambitions of those who sought favor in his court. Every question asked, every piece of evidence presented, was part of a carefully orchestrated effort to ensure her downfall. Anne, however, refused to be passive. She answered questions with clarity, defended her honor, and demonstrated the intelligence that had once made her so admired. The verdict, when it was finally announced, was a devastating moment. Anne was found guilty on all charges. The courtroom, once a place of law and order, became a chamber of doom. The men who had judged her acted with solemnity, yet the outcome had been expected by all who understood the realities of power in Tudor England. For Anne, the words of the verdict must have struck like lightning, confirming the worst fears she had carried during her weeks in the Tower. She was condemned to death, and the consequences of the judgment extended beyond her own life, threatening her family, her allies, and her legacy. Even in the face of this judgment, Anne displayed remarkable courage. She accepted the sentence with dignity, understanding that she could not change the outcome. Her thoughts likely turned to her daughter, Elizabeth, and the future that now seemed uncertain. Anne's ability to remain composed in such a dire situation was extraordinary. She had been stripped of her power, accused of unimaginable crimes, and faced the very real possibility of death, yet she did not succumb to despair. Instead, she held on to her sense of self, demonstrating the strength of character that history continues to remember. The trial also revealed the harsh realities of Tudor law and politics. Evidence could be fabricated, witnesses coerced, and judgments predetermined. A person's fate often depended not on truth, but on the whims of those in power. Anne's trial was a stark reminder of how precarious life could be, even for a queen. The legal proceedings, while formal in appearance, were deeply unfair, reflecting the intersection of personal ambition, royal desire, and political maneuvering. Anne's experience in the courtroom underscored the dangers of court life, where loyalty was fragile and justice could be manipulated. Anne's conduct during the trial left a lasting impression on those who witnessed it. Her intelligence, poise, and eloquence stood in contrast to the allegations against her. She spoke clearly, defended her honor, and maintained a sense of dignity that few could match under such pressure. Even as the evidence and accusations mounted, Anne's composure inspired admiration, demonstrating that courage and grace could persist even in the most threatening circumstances. Her ability to face such a situation with clarity and strength became one of the most remarkable aspects of her story. The condemnation also had personal consequences beyond the immediate threat to Anne's life. Her family, once proud of their connection to the Queen, now faced suspicion, shame, and political risk. Allies who had supported her were forced to distance themselves to protect their own positions. Anne's fall was not just a personal tragedy. It was a political event that reshaped the court, realigned alliances, and altered the course of English history. Her trial became a cautionary tale of the dangers of ambition, the fragility of power, and the ruthlessness of Tudor politics. As Anne prepared for the final steps following her condemnation, she faced the grim reality of what was to come. Execution in Tudor England was swift but terrifying, and she knew that she would face it with little mercy. The knowledge of impending death did not erase her fear, yet Anne drew strength from her intelligence, her dignity, and her faith. She focused on controlling what she could, her behavior, her words, and her courage. In a world where so much was beyond her control, these small measures of self-determination became crucial. The trial also highlighted Anne's resilience and strategic thinking. She understood that her behavior in the courtroom could influence how history remembered her. Every answer, every gesture, and every expression was a deliberate act of maintaining dignity and integrity. Anne's intelligence allowed her to navigate the complex and dangerous dynamics of the trial, preserving her honor even as her life hung in the balance. Her ability to remain calm under pressure was not only a personal triumph, but also a statement of courage that would inspire future generations. Anne's experience in the trial underscores the broader social and political context of Tudor England. Women, even queens, were vulnerable to the machinations of powerful men and the shifting tides of court politics. The trial demonstrated how accusations, whether true or false, could be used as weapons to remove rivals and consolidate power. Anne's story illustrates the precarious position of women in positions of influence, highlighting both the opportunities and dangers they faced in a male-dominated society. Despite the terror and injustice she faced, Anne's conduct during the trial left an enduring legacy. She demonstrated that even in the most perilous circumstances, it was possible to act with intelligence, courage, and dignity. Her responses to the accusations, her calmness under pressure, and her refusal to admit to false charges became defining elements of her historical image. Anne Boleyn, once a queen at the height of power, now faced condemnation with a strength that transcended fear, leaving a mark on history that would be remembered long after her death. By the end of the trial, Anne's fate was sealed. She was condemned to die, and the inevitability of her execution weighed heavily on everyone who had observed the proceedings. For Anne, the courtroom had been a place of judgment, humiliation, and fear, yet it had also been a stage on which she displayed courage and resilience. Her intelligence, composure, and dignity contrasted sharply with the fabricated accusations, highlighting the injustice of her situation and the harsh realities of Tudor politics. Anne Boleyn's trial and condemnation were moments of profound terror, but they were also a testament to her character. She faced the most extreme circumstances with courage, intelligence, and grace. The charges, while false and politically motivated, could not diminish her strength or her sense of self. Even in the face of overwhelming danger, Anne's behavior reflected the qualities that had once made her a celebrated queen: intelligence, determination, and an unwavering sense of dignity. As she left the courtroom, condemned to death, Anne Boleyn carried herself with a sense of resolve. She had faced one of the most terrifying experiences imaginable and had done so with courage. The trial was over, but the final chapter of her life was about to begin. The fear, anticipation, and emotional weight of what lay ahead would test her strength even further. As she prepared to confront her execution with the same dignity and bravery she had shown throughout her ordeal. The morning of May 19, 1536, was a day that would mark the end of Anne Boleyn's life. Inside the Tower of London, a sense of quiet tension hung over the grounds. Guards moved silently, and the usual sounds of daily activity were subdued, as if the castle itself sensed the gravity of the day. Anne, the once powerful queen, now faced her final hours with a mixture of fear, courage, and determination. She had spent weeks imprisoned, enduring interrogations, uncertainty, and isolation. Now, the culmination of all those terrifying days had arrived, the final walk to the scaffold, the last public moments before her life would end. Anne woke early that morning. The chamber she had occupied in the tower, though familiar after weeks of confinement, still felt cold and unwelcoming. She dressed carefully, selecting garments that reflected her dignity and grace. Though her heart must have raced with fear, she understood the importance of presenting herself with composure. Her attendants, who had remained loyal despite the danger, assisted her quietly, knowing that the Queen's courage and poise in these final moments would be remembered long after her death. Each movement, each preparation, was part of a ritual that allowed Anne to maintain a sense of control over what little remained of her life. As the guards approached, Anne walked steadily toward them, showing a calmness that belied the storm of emotions within. She knew the crowd awaiting her outside had gathered to witness her final moments, their curiosity mingled with awe and fear. For a queen who had once been celebrated for her beauty, intelligence, and influence, this journey to the scaffold was both humiliating and tragic. Yet Anne understood that her behavior in these moments could define her legacy. She walked with dignity, holding her head high, refusing to let fear completely dominate her actions. Along the way, Anne spoke to those accompanying her, offering words of gratitude and encouragement. She thanked her attendants for their loyalty, acknowledging the danger they faced simply by remaining by her side. These moments reflected her character, thoughtful, aware of others, and composed even in the most terrifying circumstances. Despite the knowledge that her life was about to end, she maintained a focus on grace and propriety, demonstrating the same intelligence and dignity that had defined her reign as queen. The scaffold was erected in the tower grounds, a platform from which the execution would be carried out. Guards and officials arranged the scene with precision, ensuring that everything would proceed swiftly and efficiently. A crowd had gathered, their whispers and anxious glances filling the air. Many in attendance were there out of curiosity, some out of a sense of duty to the king, and others perhaps with feelings of fear or sympathy. For Anne, the crowd represented both danger and historical witness. What she did and said in these final moments would be remembered for generations. Anne addressed the crowd with a short, measured speech. Her voice was calm, carrying over the hushed assembly. She affirmed her innocence, spoke of her faith, and expressed her hope for forgiveness and divine mercy. Every word was chosen carefully, reflecting not only her intelligence but also her awareness that these were her final statements in the presence of the kingdom. The speech demonstrated remarkable courage, considering the fear she must have felt. To face a crowd, knowing that death was imminent, required a combination of bravery, composure, and strength of character that few could possess. The executioner, a man selected for his skill and discretion, prepared for his grim task. Unlike many executions of the time, which were often cruel and drawn out, the king had commissioned a special sword to make Anne's death swift. This gesture, though small, reflected both Henry's complex feelings and a desire to avoid public scandal over a prolonged or botched execution. Anne, fully aware of what was about to happen, displayed remarkable calm. Her eyes, witnesses later reported, reflected both fear and acceptance. The human instinct for survival was present, yet her resolve and composure defined her final moments. Anne's final steps on the scaffold were slow and deliberate. She knelt, closed her eyes briefly in silent prayer, and then rose to face the executioner. Her mind must have been a whirlwind of thoughts, memories of her rise to power, her daughter Elizabeth, and the love she had once shared with Henry. Yet in the midst of fear and uncertainty, Anne maintained a sense of control. She understood that, in these last moments, courage and dignity could speak louder than words, leaving an enduring impression on all who witnessed her death. The execution itself was swift. The sword, designed to minimize suffering, struck with precision. Witnesses later described Anne's death as quick, almost peaceful, in contrast to the brutality often associated with executions of the time. In her final moments, Anne Boleyn exemplified a queenly dignity and human courage that would become legendary. She faced death with intelligence and calm, refusing to let terror completely define her last hours. Her composure and bravery ensured that her final act, though tragic, was also one of strength and resilience. Anne's death sent ripples through the court and the kingdom. Those who had plotted against her achieved their goal, yet her courage and composure in facing such an end inspired both fear and admiration. The story of her execution became a symbol of the dangers of power, the fragility of human influence, and the courage required to confront the inevitability of death. Even in tragedy, Anne's intelligence, poise, and dignity shone, leaving a lasting impression on history. For her family, friends, and attendants, the loss was profound. Her daughter Elizabeth would grow up without a mother, yet the legacy of Anne's courage, intelligence, and dignity would shape the child's future. The attendants who had remained loyal faced the emotional weight of witnessing such an event, yet they carried the memory of Anne's bravery forward. Anne's death was not only a personal tragedy, but also a historical event that reshaped the court, altered alliances, and influenced the course of English history. The execution highlighted the precariousness of life and power in Tudor England. A queen, once celebrated and adored, could be reduced to vulnerability and fear by a combination of political ambition, jealousy, and royal desire. Anne's experience serves as a reminder that even the most powerful individuals are subject to forces beyond their control. Her ability to face death with dignity demonstrates that courage and intelligence can persist even in the most terrifying circumstances. Anne's final moments also underscore the human aspect of history. Beyond politics, plots, and accusations, she was a woman facing the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Her fear, courage, and strength were intensely personal, yet they became part of a larger historical narrative. Witnesses to her death recorded not just the event but the character she displayed, ensuring that Anne Boleyn would be remembered for more than the charges against her. She became a symbol of resilience, dignity, and the human capacity to confront fear with grace. In the years following her death, Anne's story continued to influence English history. Her daughter Elizabeth would become one of the most celebrated monarchs in history, known for intelligence, strength, and leadership. Many historians and writers have reflected on Anne's life and death, exploring the complexities of power, gender, and human emotion in Tudor England. Anne's final moments, terrifying and tragic as they were, became a defining part of her legacy. They demonstrated that even in the face of injustice and death, human courage and dignity could endure. The Tower of London, where Anne spent her final weeks, became a historical monument to her experience. Tourists and scholars alike have walked the same halls, imagining the fear, hope, and determination that must have filled her days. The scaffold where she died remains a powerful symbol of both the cruelty of political ambition and the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. Anne Boleyn's life and death continue to captivate imaginations, not because of scandal, but because of the courage, intelligence, and resilience she displayed until her very last moments. Anne's story reminds us that history is not only shaped by kings, battles, and laws, but also by the human experience, by fear, courage, and the choices individuals make in the face of adversity. Her final moments were terrifying, yet they were also filled with remarkable dignity. She faced death with awareness, bravery, and intelligence, leaving an example that resonates centuries later. The terror of her last hours does not diminish her humanity. Rather, it highlights the extraordinary character of a woman who lived boldly and faced the ultimate consequence with grace. Even as the years passed, writers, historians, and artists have returned to Anne Boleyn's final moments to explore the emotions, the fear, and the courage that defined them. Her execution became a lens through which the harsh realities of Tudor politics, the precariousness of power, and the resilience of the human spirit can be understood. Anne's legacy is not limited to the tragedy of her death, but includes the strength she showed, the dignity she maintained, and the lasting influence she had on her daughter and on history itself. In the end, Anne Boleyn's final hours were a mixture of terror and remarkable bravery. She faced the consequences of political intrigue, royal ambition, and personal enmity with composure that few could match. Her execution, while tragic, also demonstrated her strength, intelligence, and courage. Anne's story, especially her final moments, serves as a reminder of the human capacity to confront fear with dignity, the enduring power of character in the face of injustice, and the ways in which history remembers those who navigate life with courage even when the outcome is beyond their control.